Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Clara Rose. I, of course, am literary consultant Clara Rose, and I'm your host today. If you've not been with us before, let me be the first one to say welcome to the show. We are so glad that you joined us today. Every week, I talk about all of the things that matter to those who are influencers out there or trying to become influencers out there and are doing something amazing in the world, mostly authors and entrepreneurs, but every week, if you show up, you're going to learn something exciting, maybe hear from a exciting guest, or I'm going to drop some knowledge on you and teach you something that is near and dear to my heart. Usually it's around literary consulting because that is what I do, and publishing. So if you have been here before, welcome back, my friend. Today, we're going to talk about something that is not always fun to talk about, but mistakes. Common mistakes, specifically when writing and publishing your book. We're going to talk about the most common mistakes. There are a number of them out there, which is why I always recommend that you hire a professional to help you when you're putting your book together. But these are like the top ones that really make the most mess when you're trying to get your book pulled together. So I thought made good sense if we went through them today. So one at a time, we'll talk about the 5 most common mistakes and how you can avoid them, at least potentially. All right, number 1, no analysis. Now let's talk about what that means. No analysis. I'm talking about taking the time to understand your why, understand your project, clarify what your unique value proposition is, and then you might say, Clara, what does that mean? If you've not heard that term before, I'm just saying it's what makes you stand out. What's going to make you different? What is not you specifically, but your book? Remember, we're talking about your book, putting together your book. What is going to make your book stand out from the other books out there that are likely about the same topic? It's really, really rare that I run into somebody writing a book and their topic hasn't been covered 100 different ways by 100 different people. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that you can't write an amazing book that does amazing things and changes the world. It just means that you need to know how your book's going to be different. What are you going to say that's different than everybody else that's out there saying this is what you need about this topic? So understanding what you bring to the table is super important. This definitely falls under the analysis stage. There are a couple of other things that are important, like making sure that the title that you're choosing or your potential title isn't already taken, especially if it's by somebody famous or who has already had a bestseller. They're just not going to let you take that name. So you're going to need one that's unique to you. Of course, those are just a few of the things that are important when you're analyzing. Here's just a little sneak tip that I don't tell people often unless you're inside our program already. But do the Siri or Google test. Say the name of your title into Siri or Google and see what happens. Sometimes some not so pleasant things can happen. And just being aware up front makes good sense. Okay, don't skip this. Please don't skip this stage, the analysis stage. It's not fluff. This is important stuff. If you're already writing your book, there could be a temptation to say, oh yeah, I'm already past the analysis stage, but I'm telling you, it's super important to strategically and intentionally plan your book project in such a way that helps to ensure your success. I promise you, you will thank me later if you don't skip this stage. Okay, so now we've done our analysis on our book. That's the first thing that we want to make sure we do so we don't have a boo-boo. Now let's talk about scheduling. So the next mistake that people often make is that they don't schedule their project. What do I mean by that? I mean having clearly defined start and finish date. Right? If you say someday I'm going to write a book, someday rarely comes. Someday rarely happens. So just say, I'm going to start writing my book on this day or at this time, this month, and this is my projected date of publication. So define the parameters around when you're going to create your book so that you have targets that you can hit. So if you say, I'm going to publish in January, well, you better know how far January is from where you are now and how much writing you need to accomplish every week in order to pull that off. But those clearly defined dates are going to make a huge difference in actually getting you moving forward on your book project. I think something that people don't necessarily understand about writing a book is that it is hard work. It is really hard work. You think, oh, I'm just going to sit down at my computer and I'm just going to type. Or maybe you're a notebook person, which is totally fine too. Get your notebook out and you're going to take some notes. I'm going to write my book. What they don't realize is the process is very lengthy. And if you're trying to do it on your own, often people get stalled. They write themselves into a corner or they're talking in circles. They don't have a good plan. So, starting with a schedule, clearly defining those steps along the way is super important to keeping you on track. So, I would say a schedule is your most important foundational piece to get started on your book. All right, what is our next step? Once you have your publishing date in place and your schedule in place, the next thing is your brainstorm. So, huge mistake not having a project brainstorm for your project. This is where you're going to get all of those ideas out of your head. Now, I'm a huge sticky note person. So, if you've worked with me or seen me working with people, I use sticky notes for everything. That is a super convenient way to get all of that stuff out of your head so that you can see it. So it's not just stuck in your head. And that's also going to be what we use to decide how those things fit together. So, super important that you capture all the stuff floating around in your head. That's why it's called brainstorm. It's like this little storm going on in your head, right? Get all those things out. The beautiful thing about sticky notes is they are movable. So you can move them from place to place. So when you get a whole bunch of sticky notes, then you have the opportunity to move them around and say, how does this make sense? So that they stick together in a way that's cohesive for the person who's going to read your book someday. Okay, this is something that people don't talk about often, but I want to say it because it's important. You're going to find nuggets that come out of your brain, right? Ideas that don't fit in your book. And you know what? That's okay. Your book doesn't have to be all inclusive, doesn't have to cover everything in the topic. So if you find you have some sticky notes that don't really 100% fit into the concept of your book, even if they're around the same topic, set those aside. Those are still nuggets and you still may able to be using them somewhere. Still may be able, that's what I'm trying to say, to use them somewhere. It might be that it's a separate book. It might be that you're going to create a companion journal, perhaps. And that companion journal that goes with your book could have some of those nuggets in it. Or, and I find this often, there really is a series of books around the topic that can be written. If you are an industry expert in a specific field or specific area, you may have way more to say than will fit in a single book or two books even. So in the beginning is the time to figure those things out. So as you're brainstorming, if there's a whole bunch of little sticky notes, a whole bunch of little nuggets that don't fit in a tidy way into this manuscript, set them aside and consider a secondary book or consider having a series. Now, I really 100% encourage you to get some assistance if you're going to create a series. It adds an entire another layer of planning to the mix, right? It's hard enough to plan out one book, but trying to do several of them at the same time can get tricky. So get yourself a literary consultant or somebody who mentors in this field and get some help in that. Okay, so what's the next? The next mistake we want to avoid, no project blueprint. So what do I mean by blueprint? A blueprint is a map. It's a roadmap, if you will, step by step, how this book is going to lay out. So if you want to create a cohesive message that your readers can follow, it's super important to put your pieces together in a way that makes sense for your reader. So don't forget to deliver on the promise that you said in your title and in your cover. Pull all your pieces together and put them into an order that's going to make sense. So, a good example of that is if you're telling a story or teaching something where a chronological order makes sense. You're going to start at the earliest and you're going to end at the latest, right? If you're telling your life story, you start when you're young and you're going to end currently. The same thing is true when you're putting together a nonfiction book, which is mostly what we're talking about today. Things need to be in an order that makes sense for your reader. Remember, all of this content, all of this knowledge is your knowledge. It's your content. It all is going to make sense to you, even if it's in the wrong order, right? Because it's your stuff. So make sure that when you blueprint this out for your reader, that you put it in an order that's going to make sense for them, the reader, not just to you, the person who owns this knowledge. I think that's a step that a lot of people don't do in the beginning, which is why it's so important to get that step done. So, no brainstorming, no blueprinting, huge mistake if you want a clear, concise, cohesive message. All right, let's move on to the next no, not having project accountability. No accountability. Now, think about this. If you were trying to run a marathon, you might consider hiring somebody to help you, right? A coach. What if you wanted to be Mr. Olympian or, well, I can't even think of anything because I'm just not that person, but I do have a personal trainer, right? I have a personal training goal that I'm trying to meet, a health goal that I'm trying to meet. And so I have a trainer who helps me. That's the project accountability that I'm really talking about. Accountability really, really matters. It's someone who's going to hold your feet to the fire so that you don't make excuses for yourself. Super easy to make excuses like, oh, you know what? The kids have a sniffle today, or I'm not feeling my best today, or oh, this other project is super important. I need to be working on that. If you have an accountability person, even if it's just an accountability partner, another writer perhaps, someone else trying to write a book as well, team up with them and hold each other accountable for getting the work done. Remember, we said we were going to set a schedule because it was super important to not skip that step. Right now, an accountability partner, accountability program, even, those are the people who are going to hold your feet to the fire and say, this is week whatever. Did you write your 500 words today? Or, whatever it is that you've decided, you've predetermined needs to happen in order to meet your goals. Does that make sense? Accountability really, really matters. So set yourself up for success by having an accountability system in place. All right, let's go over those from top to bottom. I know that I was pretty thorough, but let's talk about them one at a time again. What are the top 5 reasons the top 5 most common mistakes? I don't like the word mistakes, but they really are. These are things that you don't necessarily know that you're making them. They're mistakes. All right, number 1, no project analysis. Super important to analyze a project and make sure that you're actually creating the book that you want to create, whether you're creating it for legacy purposes or you're creating a tool that you want to use in your business or your ministry or your favorite cause or your brand. If you have a brand of your own, whatever that tool is, we want to create the right tool. And you're not going to know what that is until you figure out in the analysis stage. So don't skip project analysis. And then project scheduling. Super important to know the race that you're running. There's another exercising analogy, which I don't even know why I'm using those because that's not who I am. But doesn't that make sense? If you don't know where you're starting and where you're ending and when it's happening, how can you possibly stay on schedule if you don't even have a schedule to follow? So please don't skip that very important stage. And then, of course, brainstorm. Brainstorming is one of my all-time favorite tasks, especially with new authors that I work with. It's such an exciting time as they start to pull all of this stuff out of their head, or they show up with notebooks. Or I tell this story often. I had one lady show up with this big bag full of um, not sticky notes, but postcards or little note cards. I think they were like recipe cards or something, little 3x5s. And she turned it upside down and shook it out on my floor of my office. There's my book. Because that's how she had been capturing all of the little nuggets that popped into her head over time. Oh, that's good. That's going in my next book. Wasn't her first book, but if you talk to her, she'll say it was my easiest book because the brainstorm and blueprint process pulled it all together for me. So she's actually one of the on my website that says, "Don't do this without her. don't do this without this process." She dumped it out. We collected those. So that's the brainstorming. She had pre-done it. If you haven't pre-done it, that's completely fine. I encourage sticky notes. You can do it in a notebook. You can do it on your phone. I've had people show up with their phone. All of my stuff is on my phone. I just do audio. However, you've been collecting all of those things is completely fine. I like to convert them to sticky notes personally because of the next step, the blueprint, right? Blueprinting your project. It's super easy to move sticky notes around. So I personally like a poster board or a whiteboard. You could use a blank wall if you'd like, and then just get those sticky notes up there. Then you can blueprint how they go together. Go, oh, that obviously goes over here, and that one obviously goes over there. And so that you can get a roadmap to follow before you start writing. Interestingly enough, people normally who have no guidance normally sit down at their laptop or their computer or wherever they're going to capture their thoughts, and they just start writing. Those are the people who contact me or someone like me and say, "I've been working on my book for, 9 years or 6 years or whatever," because they just don't know where to go next. They haven't had any guidance along the way. And I think that that's, of course, no fault of their own. They just didn't know. So, project accountability, that's the final piece. The final mistake that people usually make is they have no one holding their feet to the fire, no accountability, no one saying, "Did you do the work today? Did you put your butt in the seat and get the writing done?" Even if it's a writers group online, maybe you can find a local writers group. Of course, we have a writers group that you can be a part of as well. Having somebody else on the same journey that you're on is super powerful. I actually belong to a couple of mastermind groups for something else outside of my area of expertise, and I show up every single week to those mastermind accountability calls because they hold my feet to the fire. There's somebody looking me, especially on Zoom. This is true, right? Somebody looking at you in the Zoom eyeball saying, "So, Clara, how did you do this week?" That's the kind of accountability that I'm talking about. Not somebody who can just say, check in and say, "Are you working on your book?" "Yep, I'm working on my book." "Great." And you're off and running. That's not the accountability I'm talking about. I'm talking about someone who will look you in the eye and say, "What does your schedule say?" It says you're writing 500 words a week, 500 words a day, whatever it is you predetermined. I'm not your mother. I'm not telling you what you have to do. I'm just saying if you create a schedule, you need that accountability person who's willing to say, "Did you get your writing done? Did you hit your next milestone? What happened if you didn't?" Right? And then encourage you. It doesn't have to be a mean person. Encourage you to get back on track. Stay on track to getting your book done so that someday you actually will be able to get your book published. Now, I've talked a lot about the 5 top common mistakes that people make and just even getting started on their book. I'm going to tell you about an easy solution, and it is called the Savvy Author Membership. And the Savvy Author Membership is exactly all of the things we've been talking about today, but it's put together in such a way that it walks you step by step and hold your hand through the process. It's the first of its kind that gives you everything that you need to know to create a successful book. Plus, we educate you about the publishing industry. There are many things that when you're on the outside of an industry that you just simply don't know. For instance, you might not know that the different parts of your book need assets, right? You might not understand that the cover, that's a book asset. You're going to need to pay someone to do that, or you're going to need to figure that one out for yourself. We teach you how to do that. Inside your book, if you have epigraphs or any graphics or graphs, those are all things that need to be created as well. What about your landing page or your website for selling your book? What about your posts that you're going to post on social media to help promote your book? Those are all assets. And we cover all of that in the Savvy Author membership as well. That is in the Creating Author Assets with Canva. So if you haven't used Canva before, we even have basics of Canva to get you started. And then, of course, guess what's built right into the whole thing that truly makes it work? Accountability. So you have a literary consultant, me and my staff, who will help you every step of the way, keeping you accountable. And of course, we're going to start with the brainstorm and blueprint process. It is a proprietary process, proven process that we use to get people from idea to ready to write their manuscript. I know that sounds crazy, but you really do need to follow that process so you have a good outline to follow to write your book. So we're going to go through, how do I do a project analysis? And we have actually steps and assignments for you to do that when you're done, your project analysis is complete. We're going to move you on to putting together a schedule for your book, setting that deadline. Here's when I'm going to publish. Accountability is going to hold your feet to the fire to make sure you stick to that. And of course, we're going to do your brainstorm, gathering all of that information, whether you have it on sticky notes, 3x5 cards, maybe it's in a notebook, wherever you've been putting those. We're going to collect all those together. If you haven't even started the process, that's fine too. We will walk you through getting a brainstorm done so that you know what's going in your book. And then the next step, of course, is the blueprint. And that's where we're going to put everything in order in a way that makes perfect sense for your reader. This is where we're going to remove anything that doesn't fit and then also discover if we have forgotten something, right? As you put the pieces together, the roadmap together, you may discover, oh, you know what? I didn't even talk about this other point. Super important. And I'm going to go back and do the research and do a little more brainstorming on that. So I have all the pieces I need when I blueprint my book before I start writing. Now, that is something that I hear a lot when I'm talking to people for the first time. They're like, wow, I didn't know there was so much to do before I started writing. That whole brainstorm and blueprint process happens before we write word one. Now we literally only have to do one thing at a time. I like to think of them as like little nuggets, little individual nuggets. So we only work on one piece at a time. Chapter one. Okay, let's pull out our blueprint. What did we say would be in chapter one? Oh, here's what we said would be there. Now we know what to write about, and all we have to write about is chapter one. Does that make sense? So then when chapter one is written and set aside, now we can move on to chapter two. Oh, let's look at our blueprint. Oh, now we know what to write about for chapter two. I know that sounds overly simplified, but when you're in the midst of all of these ideas and all of this stuff floating around in your head, it can be super overwhelming. And this process simplifies that for you. If you are interested in learning more about being a part of the Savvy Author membership, you can hop on over to clararose.com and learn more about it. You can either just sign up for the membership, or you can say, hey, send me some more information, and I'm happy to send you some more information. You'll also find on my website a place where you can click to connect with me. So if you're like, okay, yeah, I want to talk. I want to talk this out first. I need more information. There's a place to hop on my calendar. So you can just say, yep, I'd like to have a quick 15-minute chat. Hop on my calendar, and I'm happy to do that with you. Of course, if you are not quite ready, you're like, I'm going to do this in September, that's completely fine. Come back and sign up later if you'd like, or you can just jump on into the membership now, knowing that you're not quite ready to start, because our weekly live calls will teach you so much about the publishing industry. Every week, we all jump on a video call together, ask questions, talk about our projects. That's a great place to pair up with other accountability partners. Sometimes we break out into other Zoom rooms so that you can have an opportunity to get to know your fellow Savvy Author members. It's a great place to just collaborate. Some really cool things have happened when authors who are on the same journey together get together. We've had some co-writing happening, some super fun things. But at a minimum, it's a great place to find somebody to say, hey, do you think you'd be willing to read one of my chapters? I'll read one of your chapters, and we can give each other some feedback. And of course, our staff is always here for the same thing. If you have questions, concerns, we're here to help you. We're going to teach you all the basics of editing, all the basics of formatting, all the little pieces that you're going to need to know to get your book out into a world that is in a savvy way, right? We're all about being savvy authors. All right, I'm just about out of time, my friends, but thank you for showing up every week to hear what I have to say. I hope that I've given you value, taught you something that you didn't know about writing a book and becoming an author. And I'd love to see you in the Savvy Author membership. And of course, if you still have more questions, drop me an email over at hello@clararose.com. I am always happy to answer your questions. I look forward to being a part of your journey as you get your message out of your head onto paper and out to the world where it can make a difference in the world around you. I know that you have something to say, and doing it alone is scary and hard. So I just want to encourage you. There's no need to do it alone. Oh, you can also, I never say this, but I always remember when it's too late, you can find me on social media. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn. Don't forget to follow my YouTube channel, which I never say because I just never remember to say that. Or you can just go to Area 52 and watch me there every week. All right, I'm out of time, my friends. I will see you next week right here. Take care.